My name is Marcus Webb, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest problem was whether to renew my lease on a Chicago apartment that cost more than my parents' first mortgage, while wearing the same black hoodie with a faded tech company logo, dark jeans that had seen better years, and steel-toe work boots that clicked against hardwood floors during my restless pacing between dead-end jobs. I was 28 years old, surviving on unemployment benefits and the kind of chronic anxiety that comes from watching your savings account drain, while job applications disappear into digital voids. When the handwritten letter arrived from Aaron Chen, Director of Maritime Operations for Millbrook County Coastal Authority, offering me a position as lighthouse keeper at Beacon Point Light Station with housing included, and a salary that seemed too generous for such an isolated job, I didn't question why they needed someone with my background in electrical systems and emergency communications. Beacon Point Light Station turned out to be a towering monument to maritime safety. A massive white cylinder of weathered concrete and steel rising 120 feet above jagged rocks that jutted from the Atlantic like broken teeth. The lighthouse had been automated for decades, its Fresnel lens rotating with mechanical precision every 10 seconds, casting a beam that could be seen for 20 nautical miles on clear nights. My quarters were built into the lighthouse base, a surprisingly modern apartment with thick stone walls, reinforced windows designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, and a direct communication line to the Coast Guard station 40 miles south. Aaron Chen conducted my orientation via encrypted radio transmission, explaining the lighthouse's critical importance to shipping lanes that carried billions of dollars in cargo through treacherous waters. But then he transmitted a classified addendum containing site-specific emergency protocols that weren't standard lighthouse operations. The protocols were written in clinical language. Protocol 1. The primary beacon must never be extinguished during fog conditions, regardless of mechanical failure or power outages. Protocol 2. If the foghorn sounds patterns other than standard maritime signals, document but do not investigate. Protocol 3. During fog conditions lasting longer than 6 hours, maintain radio silence except for genuine emergencies. Protocol 4. If you observe vessels that do not appear on radar, log coordinates but do not attempt communication. The first month was routine maritime isolation. My days were spent maintaining equipment, monitoring weather conditions, and conducting twice-daily inspections. I wore my usual black hoodie and boots during long shifts, the familiar weight of my steel-toed footsteps on metal stairs making the transition from urban chaos to coastal solitude feel like psychological salvation. The lighthouse beam swept across the horizon with hypnotic regularity, its light painting the surrounding waters in brilliant white arcs. During my 5th week, on a Tuesday night when fog rolled in with supernatural speed and density, everything changed. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the foghorn began sounding a pattern I'd never heard. Not the standard 3-blast warning, but a complex sequence that seemed to follow mathematical progressions. The radar detected 17 vessels converging on the lighthouse from impossible directions, their positions shifting faster than any known maritime technology could achieve. As fog thickened until I couldn't see the beacon's light reflecting off gallery windows just 50 feet away, my emergency radio crackled. Beacon Point Light Station. This is Coast Guard Cutter Millbrook requesting immediate lighthouse shutdown for emergency search and rescue operations. The voice was authoritative, professional, and completely wrong. There was no Coast Guard Cutter Millbrook, and Protocol 1 explicitly forbade extinguishing the beacon during fog conditions under any circumstances. The radio transmission's authoritative tone still echoed as I sat frozen at my monitoring station, my black hoodie damp with cold sweat, watching radar displays show impossible vessel movements through fog so dense it seemed to absorb the lighthouse beam itself. I tried to establish encrypted communication with the actual Coast Guard station, But the fog interfered with radio transmission in ways that defied meteorological explanation. Static filled every frequency, punctuated by fragments of voices describing navigation hazards that didn't exist on any chart, references to the deep channel, anchor points in the void, and cargo that must not reach shore. The fog behaved in ways that violated basic atmospheric physics, forming geometric patterns around the lighthouse beam, creating corridors of clear air that led nowhere, and maintaining perfect density at specific distances, as if the light possessed properties that actively repelled the phenomenon. Through brief gaps, I glimpsed vessels that appeared on no radar system, ships with hull configurations that seemed wrong, their proportions suggesting cargo holds far larger than their visible superstructure could contain. The lighthouse beam itself began exhibiting anomalies impossible with standard Fresnel lens technology. Instead of casting uniform white light, the beam occasionally displayed prismatic effects that separated into colors that hurt to look at directly, creating spectra that seemed to extend beyond visible wavelengths. The automated rotation system would hesitate at specific compass bearings, as if encountering resistance from the fog itself. At 2:17 a.m., the foghorn began sounding a new pattern, rhythmic progression that matched the lighthouse beam's rotation cycle, creating synchronized audiovisual signals that seemed designed to communicate rather than warn. The radar detected a massive vessel approaching from due north, moving at impossible speeds for its apparent size. As it drew closer, I could make out its silhouette, a cargo ship with dimensions that defied physics, its hull stretching beyond what radar indicated, its superstructure reaching heights that should have made it unstable. The radio crackled again with a different voice, softer, more intimate. "Lighthouse keeper, you must understand what you're protecting. The beacon doesn't just guide ships, it guards the boundary between what belongs in our reality and what must remain in the deep places where geography becomes negotiable. The fog brings them closer to shore, but the light holds them at the threshold. If the beam fails, if the boundary weakens, if the cargo reaches land." The transmission cut to static, but the implication was clear. The lighthouse wasn't just navigation aid. It was a barrier. And the fog wasn't weather but camouflage for something seeking passage into our reality through maritime channels that existed in spaces between conventional navigation. The next morning brought horrifying clarity as I accessed classified files using administrative credentials hidden in the lighthouse's communication system. Beacon Point Light Station wasn't just a lighthouse. It was the final checkpoint in a vast interdimensional monitoring network. And I wasn't a lighthouse keeper, but the last human guardian standing between our reality and cargo ships that transported materials from dimensions where physics operated according to different principles. Aaron Chen wasn't a maritime operations director. He was Dr. Aaron Blackwood, a federal researcher specializing in dimensional boundary studies. His real credentials revealed that Beacon Point had been selected as a monitoring station for Project Deep Channel, a joint international initiative studying cargo vessels that operated through dimensional shipping lanes, carrying materials between realities that existed parallel to our own. The lighthouse beam wasn't just illumination but a dimensional anchor, preventing ships from completing their approach to shore and unloading cargo that would fundamentally alter physical reality. The shipping manifests contained cargo descriptions that defied comprehension, geometric configurations with self-modifying properties, consciousness-altering atmospheric compounds, temporal displacement materials requiring sub-zero storage, and biological samples from evolutionary branches that never stabilized. The vessels weren't smuggling conventional contraband. They were transporting the raw materials of reality itself, substances that existed in dimensions where human concepts of space, time, and causality were merely suggestions. My predecessor, Captain James Walsh, had maintained Beacon Point for 17 years before being found on the lighthouse gallery, positioned as if reaching towards something in the fog, his eyes reflecting light that wasn't coming from any terrestrial source. His final radio transmission: "The cargo is beautiful. I understand now why they need to bring it here. Our reality is so limited, so constrained by physics and logic. They're offering us evolution, transformation, the chance to exist in dimensions where consciousness isn't trapped in biological form." The Lighthouse automation system had been gradually failing, its dimensional anchoring properties weakening as components aged beyond design specifications. The fog ships had been testing the boundary for months, waiting for mechanical failure that would allow them to complete their approach and begin unloading cargo that would fundamentally alter reality in ways human consciousness wasn't equipped to survive. That night, I climbed the lighthouse stairs wearing my black hoodie, dark jeans, and steel-toe boots for what I knew would be either successful defense of dimensional boundaries or my transformation into something that could process interdimensional cargo manifests. I carried emergency repair equipment, backup power cells, and manual override controls that would allow me to maintain the beacon's dimensional anchoring properties, even if automated systems failed during the fog ship's final approach. At exactly 3:00 a.m., the Lighthouse automation system began experiencing cascading failures designed to occur simultaneously, creating a crisis that would force me to choose between maintaining basic illumination for conventional maritime safety or preserving specialized electromagnetic fields that prevented interdimensional vessels from completing their approach. The primary generator fluctuated, the Fresnel lens rotation mechanism began grinding, and radio equipment started broadcasting fragments of interdimensional shipping communications. As I worked frantically to maintain full operational capacity, the fog ship began its final approach, its impossible dimensions becoming apparent as it entered maximum range. Through gallery windows, I could see crew members moving across its deck, humanoid figures with proportions suggesting adaptation to different gravitational conditions, their movements coordinated in ways that implied collective consciousness. They were preparing to unload cargo that existed in geometric configurations too complex for human perception. The radio crackled with transmission from the fog ship's captain. "Lighthouse Keeper, you are interfering with commerce that predates your species by millions of years. The cargo we carry represents evolution itself, materials that will free your reality from constraints of linear time, three-dimensional space, and consciousness trapped in biological form. Allow us to complete our delivery, and humanity will join the interdimensional economy as full participants." The confrontation escalated as the fog ship's crew used technological systems operating according to physics principles from their home dimension, creating localized distortions in space-time that made the lighthouse beam flicker as reality itself became negotiable. With every ounce of technical skill and desperate determination, I activated the lighthouse beacon's emergency overrides, channeling every available power source through the Fresnel lens system to create electromagnetic fields that pushed against the fog ship with physical force. The lighthouse beam intensified beyond design specifications, creating a barrier of pure electromagnetic energy that prevented the fog ship from completing its approach. The vessel began to retreat, its impossible dimensions folding back into interdimensional space, as the beacon's dimensional anchoring properties forced it to return to shipping lanes that existed between realities. The aftermath left Beacon Point Light Station operating at emergency power levels, my black hoodie singed from electromagnetic feedback, dark jeans damp with perspiration from hours of maintaining dimensional barriers. The fog had dissipated with supernatural speed, revealing an ocean that looked deceptively normal but felt fundamentally different, as if the boundary between dimensions had been permanently altered. The psychological trauma of witnessing interdimensional cargo operations, and preventing what might have been humanity's evolutionary advancement manifested in waves of existential uncertainty. For brief moments during the fog ship's approach, I had glimpsed materials they carried, geometric configurations that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, consciousness-enhancing substances that could free human awareness from biological limitations, and technologies that operated where space and time were negotiable. Days passed before Dr. Blackwood arrived by Coast Guard helicopter to assess lighthouse systems and debrief me about the interdimensional contact event. His expression was grim with knowledge of what had been lost, explaining that fog ships appeared only during specific atmospheric conditions, occurring perhaps once every decade, carrying cargo representing accumulated evolutionary advancement of civilizations that had transcended three-dimensional existence millions of years ago. The lighthouse automation systems were upgraded with technology incorporating components that seemed to exist partially in our dimension and partially elsewhere, creating a permanent dimensional anchor that would prevent future fog ships from approaching regardless of conditions. Dr. Blackwood explained that my position was now permanent, that isolation and psychological stress of maintaining dimensional boundaries required human oversight that couldn't be automated. 6 months after my defense of Beacon Point Light Station, I live with terrible uncertainty of whether I saved humanity from transformation. It couldn't survive or prevented our species from achieving evolutionary advancement that would have freed us from biological limitations. I work simple jobs avoiding maritime operations or dimensional physics research. The psychological damage manifests in dreams where I experience fragments of interdimensional consciousness, moments where I perceive geometric patterns beyond three-dimensional space, and persistent sensation that I'm trapped in reality too small for the awareness I briefly glimpsed. Sometimes, on foggy nights, I stand on coastal cliffs watching for lights that move in patterns too complex for conventional navigation, hoping and fearing that another fog ship might approach with cargo that could complete humanity's transformation. I still wear dark jeans and steel-toe boots because consistency helps anchor me when reality feels negotiable. But I've learned to fear clear nights because sometimes I see stars